It's now my pleasure to welcome the Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs, Tim Watts, to the stage. Minister Watts has been in the House of Representatives since 2013 and came to Parliament with a background in the technology sector. He is one of the most knowledgeable and passionate Australian politicians across the spectrum of topics we've been discussing here this week. And as Australia seeks to do more globally across the fields of cyber, the information space, and in critical and emerging technologies, he will be a leading force pushing the government, Parliament, as well as industry and civil society to do all we can to simultaneously increase innovation, collaboration, resilience, and security. A major theme over the 2 days has been how democracies need to do more to address the misuse of technology by authoritarian regimes. Let me give you a quote from Tim in 2021. Over the past decade, authoritarian nations have been pursuing coordinated, well-resourced strategies to impose their values on technology and the internet, developing domestic technology champions to help them do so. Meanwhile, democratic nations have engaged with these challenges on an ad hoc basis at best, and in doing so, have lacked both ideological coherence and resource commitment. It's time democracies got in the game in the contest for the future of the internet. Isn't that spot on with what we've been talking about in almost every Sydney Dialogue session? So with his deep understanding of the importance of the public and private sectors working together on technological development and on the need for democratic governments to be active, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome the Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs to provide his remarks. Minister, thank you for your support, and over to you.
Well, thank you for that very generous introduction, Justin. Let me begin by acknowledging the Gadigal of the Eora Nation and the traditional owners of the land, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and like all members of the new Australian government, reaffirm my commitment to implementing the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full: voice, treaty and truth. While it's a bit of a cliche that the COVID-19 pandemic has changed us, and in particular, the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the way that many of us think about risk. As what is somewhat unkindly referred to as a geriatric millennial, I grew up in a world of the increasing rewards of an ever more interconnected and interdependent world. The internet directly connected me with new people, new ideas, new cultures from around the world. Digital innovation spread unprecedented efficiency and economic opportunity through more and more complex international supply chains. And the benefits of becoming ever more intensely connected to and reliant on each other could be seen in every new version of an iPhone, in every new international friend made on social media, and every new meme you're exposed to on the internet. The COVID-19 pandemic, however, brought home the risks of interconnectedness and interdependence in a way that touched all of our lives directly. Not just the risks of the spread of a pandemic through interconnected global people movements, but COVID-19 also brought home our exposure to systemic risks, the way that a shock in one place could have cascading impacts throughout a connected system, how a novel coronavirus could affect semiconductor manufacturing in Asia and result in car manufacturing grinding to a halt in Europe, the way that a risk to one part of a system affected everyone connected to it. Now, while the first 2 decades of this millennium were dominated by optimism in the pursuit of efficiency, recent years since the pandemic have seen a necessary refocusing on risk management and on building resilience. As a nation, we've been thinking hard about whole-of-nation cyber resilience as part of the Albanese government's review of our cyber security strategy. Domestically, we've seen 3 of our biggest data breaches in Australia's history in just the last 6 months. And a decade of inaction has left Australia vulnerable. As my colleague and friend, the Minister for Home Affairs and Cyber Security, Clare O'Neil, has said, we're about 5 years behind where we should be. And as you heard at this conference yesterday, Minister O'Neil is working hard to build Australia's domestic cyber resilience. But we're not the only country confronting the risks of cyber incidents in an interconnected and interdependent world. All nations are currently grappling with how best to manage these risks in the cyber domain. That's part of why we're integrating Australia's domestic and international cybersecurity strategies in the review we are currently undertaking. Since the election, the Albanese government has made it clear that we've prioritised re-engaging with our Pacific family in our foreign policy agenda. We've been turning up and we've been listening to Pacific priorities, and we've heard their perspectives clearly. We've heard, for example, that climate change is an existential risk for Pacific Islands nations, and we understand that taking real action on climate change is a precondition for being a partner of choice in the Pacific family. We also understand that helping to build resilience against the threat of climate change must be a priority for our development assistance in the Pacific Islands. We've also heard requests for assistance from Pacific Islands nations confronting the kinds of natural disasters that are expected to become more common as a result of climate change. Indeed, just last month, Australians stepped up to calls from the government of Vanuatu to help respond to the terrible tropical cyclones Judy and Kevin. I'm sure you saw on the news that over 600 Australian Defence Force personnel were deployed to Vanuatu. Australians were there to help respond to the impact of the cyclones on health and community infrastructure, on power facilities, on people, on the systems that those communities rely on to function. And as a member of the Pacific Islands family, we were there for another member of the Pacific family in their time of crisis. We always will be. This approach has many parallels to the way that we are thinking about the challenge of building cyber resilience in the Pacific. We've heard clearly in our engagement with Pacific Islands nations that increasing digitalisation and connectivity are central to the economic development objectives of Pacific Islands nations. Indeed, as Samoan Prime Minister, the Honourable Fiame Naomi Mataafa, said this morning, Pacific countries are looking for ways to leverage technology to increase efficiency and sustainability to achieve their development goals. But we also understand that realising these economic development objectives relies on simultaneous increases in the level of cyber resilience in Pacific Islands. Pacific Islands governments understand that as they increasingly digitise and connect to the global economy, they are increasingly exposed to global systemic cyber threats. We've come to find that as nations become more reliant on these systems, cyber incidents can have a similar impact in those countries to natural disasters. Whether a government IT system or a national emergency service provider has been taken offline by a cyclone or a ransomware attack, the cascading impacts on the people and communities relying on those systems is very similar. Now, last year at the Singapore International Cyber Week, I warned that we would inevitably see an increasing number of ransomware incidents in the global south as digitisation and connectivity of these nations grew. And in the last 6 months, this warning has certainly become a reality. We've repeatedly seen the devastating impact of major cyber incidents on Pacific Islands nations in recent times. The impacts of natural disasters on the Pacific in recent times are obvious and devastating. But while you may have seen Australia's response to tropical cyclones Judy and Kevin, they're very photogenic on the news, what you probably didn't see is Australia's response to cyber incidents in the Pacific. These recent incidents didn't attract the same level of media coverage as tropical cyclones Judy and Kevin, but Australia's response was the same. Australian cybersecurity experts and diplomats were invited by Pacific countries to help respond to major cyber crises. Responding to these incidents didn't require Chinook helicopters, assessment aircraft or LHDs, but the contributions that these Australians made were huge. They helped recover Pacific countries' communication systems, payment systems and citizen data after devastating ransomware attacks. These Australians brought ambulance services back online and ensured hospitals could continue to treat patients effectively. This Australian support also extended beyond the immediate technical crisis. We were also there to build long-term resilience, to build back government networks better. These DFAT-led teams worked side by side with Pacific technical experts, policymakers and leaders to share knowledge, exchange ideas and provide education, awareness and best practice advice. We've long been proud to play our part as a member of the Pacific family in building resilience against natural disasters and helping nations and communities to recover when disaster does strike. And as Pacific nations develop more connected and digitally reliant economies and societies, I'm already proud of the way that Australia has helped to build resilience against cyber risks and to assist with recovery when incidents occur. But the challenge is growing and evolving. So in the Albanese government's review of our cybersecurity strategy, we've been thinking hard about how we can best support the economic development of ambitions of Pacific countries in the context of these growing cyber threats. We've been listening to the perspectives of Pacific Islands nations, non-government organisations, think tanks and industry during this process. We want to be the partner of choice for the Pacific family on cyber resilience building and on incident response. Australia needs to step up and streamline sustained day-to-day resilience building efforts in the long term. And Australia can do more to provide targeted responses to cybersecurity incidents in our region. We've heard the challenges that Pacific countries confront when uplifting their cybersecurity. Australia faces many of the same challenges in our uplift, challenges like skills and local resources. But there are also unique challenges which go above and beyond the challenges that we face in Australia, challenges of scale and of fundamental connectivity. But we believe that with our hard-won experience, our expertise and capacity, and crucially, our relationships with our Pacific family, we can make a uniquely Australian contribution to the effort. We've heard that Pacific countries welcome our engagement and support our causes, and like us and any country, we've also heard the consistent and legitimate calls in the Pacific for the preservation and strengthening of their sovereignty. We hear and respect those calls. We want the same thing in our own country. We understand the need to have sovereign skills, capability and technical solutions when securing your country. So that's front of mind when we think about the security of our region and as we rethink our international cyber policy. It's a collaborative process and we're asking some tough questions. How can we help build the national capabilities of Pacific countries without creating a brain drain? How can we leverage Australian expertise and capacity to support Pacific objectives as a partner while vigilantly respecting their sovereignty? How can we build institutions that continue to listen to Pacific priorities while uplifting their cyber resilience? How can we work on our own institutions here at home to become a long-term sustainable partner? How can we continue to build and maintain trust between leaders and between cyber experts in the Pacific family? We've been thinking hard about these questions and we welcome your input. We understand that government doesn't have all the answers. We know that the technology space relies on engagement from players across industries, institutions and sectors. We know that we can't do it alone. This dialogue has provided an opportunity for experts to meet, to exchange ideas, and hopefully to get outside your intellectual comfort zone. It's also provided us with a rare opportunity for us to engage in blue sky thinking. We recognise that there are many cyber risks facing both Australia and Pacific nations. But we need to take this opportunity to think about how we want the world to look and how we can influence the world to get there. We need diverse voices submitting to the cybersecurity discussion paper review. So I challenge you to harness the energy and ideas you've gained here at the Sydney Dialogue. I challenge you to think creatively about how we can make the online space and our region a safer and more resilient place. I encourage you to participate in the conversation. Thank you for being here.